J.D. Vance looked Gavin Newsom dead in the eye on live television, asked him one single question, and the man gunning for the presidency completely choked. This wasn't some opposition research trap or a surprise scandal. It was just basic math regarding $37 billion in public funds. We are talking about $37 billion allocated for homelessness, which, when you divide it by the 187,000 unhoused people in California, comes out to $197,000 per person. Think about that for a second, because that is enough cash to buy a median-priced home outright in 40 different states across the country. So Vance asked the obvious question, asking where exactly the money went, and Newsom froze because the homelessness rate jumped 44%, and he genuinely had no clue where the funds vanished to. It wasn't a cover-up, it was just pure negligence, because he never bothered to track it. His own state auditor went on the record stating there was zero tracking of spending or outcomes since 2021. $37 billion spent, zero receipts, and zero results. And when lawmakers actually tried to pass a bill forcing him to track the money, he used his veto power to kill it. Nobody else sabotaged Gavin Newsom here. He spent $37 billion, refused to look at the ledger, and then vetoed the exact people trying to hold him accountable. And right there in front of 9 million viewers, J.D. Vance just flipped open a laptop and read the receipts for him. It paints a grim picture, proving that everything this governor touches just evaporates. The budgets vanish, the housing vanishes, the big political promises vanish. The only things that refuse to vanish are the 187,000 citizens left sleeping on the pavement. And this is the exact track record he wants to pitch to the entire country. Let's back up to how this started, because the town hall was barely 11 minutes in, and honestly, Newsom was cruising. He delivered his opening pitch exactly how he always does, standing, gesturing, viting batero, and filling the room with that specific energy of a guy who has spent his entire adult life figuring out exactly how to seduce a camera lens. He spent 5 solid minutes flexing about California being the 5th largest economy on Earth, calling it the engine of American tech, the birthplace of the electric vehicle revolution, and the global leader in climate policy. He dropped the buzzword innovation 6 times. He invoked the future 4 times. He framed California as the ultimate proof that progressive governance actually works, and those sentences landed smoothly. They landed with the crisp confidence of a 58-year-old man who is 6'3" and essentially running a shadow presidential campaign without officially declaring it. This broadcast was his audition. America was the audience, and for those first 11 minutes, everything went perfectly to script. Then the moderator handed the floor to Vance, and 5 seconds of dead silence fell over the room. Vance didn't look at Newsom, he didn't look at the crowd, and he didn't play to the cameras. He was just staring at his laptop screen, his fingers resting on the keys, looking exactly as patient and loaded as he did during that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez town hall 3 weeks prior. Then he finally spoke, telling the governor that yes, California's economy is massive, and he is correct about that. But he immediately pointed out the flip side, noting that California also houses the largest homeless population in the country, with 187,000 people sleeping outside on any given night. He noted that the governor was correct about the money, but conveniently forgot to mention the human toll. When Vance looked up, his voice didn't have that polished political sheen. It was flat, Midwestern, and stripped of any theatrical charm, sounding like a guy building an argument the exact way an accountant builds a spreadsheet, one load-bearing row at a time. He looked at the audience and said, "The governor just spent 5 minutes telling you what California is, so I am going to spend my time telling you what California costs." He clicked open a new tab. Backstage in the green room, Newsom's debate prep team felt the air get sucked out of the room. Jake Ellison, the deputy chief of staff who told his team to just let the governor be himself, realized the game had changed. They prepped Newsom for a standard political debate, but Vance wasn't debating. He was auditing. Ellison scrambled, texting his policy director to pull every scrap of homeless spending data they had. The response came 11 seconds later, and it was a disaster, revealing the state had 6 different tracking systems and none of them matched. Ellison just stared at his phone, knowing that systemic failure wasn't an answer to Vance's question. It was the exact vulnerability Vance was about to expose. Back on stage, Vance started reading straight from the public record, citing state auditor reports, independent investigations, and official budget documents. No spin, just verified numbers drawn straight from California's own ledgers. He laid it out clearly, stating that since 2019, the state poured approximately $37 billion into homelessness programs. Yet, during that exact time frame, the number of people living on the streets swelled from 151,000 to 187,000. That is an increase of 36,000 people, representing a 24% spike. Vance typed a simple calculation into his laptop, projecting it onto the studio monitor for everyone to see. $37 billion divided by the 151,000 homeless people who were there when Newsom took office comes out to roughly $245,000 per person. He let that number hang in the air for 3 or 4 seconds, just letting it sink in. Then he opened another tab showing median home prices across the country, letting the screen scroll the reality check. Ohio, $210,000. Michigan, $230,000. Texas, $240,000. Tennessee, floating around $200,000 to $225,000. $245,000 per person is literally enough cash to buy a house outright in 40 out of 50 states. The state spent enough money to purchase a home for every single unhoused person. But instead of solving the problem, the homeless population jumped by 24%. To put a face to the numbers, Vance brought up Dorothy Chen, a retired third-grade teacher from Sacramento, who spent 34 years in the classroom before retiring in 2021. Her state pension gives her $3,400 a month, but her rent is $1,900, which eats up 56% of her fixed income. She only has $87,000 in savings, making her what policy experts call one emergency away. A bad car repair, an unexpected hospital visit, or a sudden rent hike, and she is out on the street. That $37 billion was supposed to build a safety net for folks exactly like Dorothy, but she hasn't seen a single dime of it, and the 187,000 people already on the street are still stuck there. Newsom leaned into his mic, trying to turn the charm back on, though it was visibly strained, like a dimmer switch struggling to hold light. He went for the classic political deflection, calling it a national crisis, needing a national response, and blaming the weather by claiming California gets 30% of the nation's homeless population because of its temperate climate and robust services network. He tried to pass the buck, arguing the real bottleneck isn't the state investment, but local implementation by cities and counties. Vance cut him off cold, reminding him that he is the sitting executive. He pointed out that Newsom signed the budget and allocated those $37 billion, yet his own state auditor and oversight council admit they haven't tracked spending or program effectiveness since June 2021. Vance made it clear this isn't a city issue or a county issue. He told the governor he didn't know where the cash went because he simply refused to look. The cameras caught Newsom's jaw tighten, a microspasm of the masseter muscle broadcast in high definition to 9 million screens, marking the exact moment everyone realized the slick talking points weren't working anymore. Vance threw 3 historical quotes up on the screen, showing the same politician making the same empty promises over 2 decades. First, 2004, as mayor of San Francisco, Newsom promised to end homelessness in the city within 10 years. The reality is the homeless population went from 5,550 in 2005 to 8,323 in 2024, marking a 50% increase. Next quote, 2020. As governor, he stood up at the State of the State address and called solving homelessness his cause and his calling. The result was statewide numbers jumping from 151,000 in 2019 to 187,000 in 2024, a 24% increase. Final quote, May 2021, Newsom promised to end family homelessness within 5 years. That deadline expired 6 weeks before the broadcast, and family homelessness in California is nowhere near solved. Vance didn't even need to editorialize. He just introduced Michaela Williams, a 4-year-old girl photographed sleeping on a Sacramento park bench this past March, clutching a bag of toys because her parents don't have a roof over their heads. She is the direct casualty of a political promise made 5 years ago. Vance just read the quotes, read the outcomes, and stared at Newsom like an auditor looking at a fraudulent bank statement. He wasn't yelling or grandstanding. He just carried the quiet patience of someone who knows the math speaks for itself. 3 decades of promises, the same problem and the same result. Every single time, the promises inflated, the budgets exploded, and the reality on the streets got worse. Vance asked the room, at what point do we admit this isn't a lack of funding, but a lack of leadership? Newsom tried to pivot again, falling back on the big picture defense he has used in every interview for 7 years, bringing up housing costs and mental health failures, and repeating that states like Texas and Florida have good weather too. Vance didn't miss a beat, shooting back that neither of those states has 187,000 homeless people. He told the governor the difference isn't the weather, it is the management. That short sentence hit the room like a freight train. You could feel the shift in the audience, where even a woman wearing a Sacramento City lanyard, someone who voted for Newsom twice and showed up to cheer for him, physically shifted in her seat and stopped clapping. Vance's tone shifted again, getting quieter and more precise, sounding like a guy who just found an accounting glitch so bad he had to double-check his own sanity. He brought up a 2024 bill, Assembly Bill 2903, a simple piece of legislation introduced by Assemblyman Josh Hoover. All it did was require state agencies to actually file annual reports on how they spend homelessness funds and whether those programs work. The bill passed both chambers of the legislature, and then Vance paused before dropping the hammer. The governor vetoed it. Vance closed his laptop, not because he was done, but because he didn't need a screen for the next part. He just needed the room to listen. He laid it out plain and simple, stating that the administration spent $37 billion without tracking a single cent. The auditor flagged the oversight failure, lawmakers handed over a bill to fix it, and the governor intentionally vetoed the law. Vance asked why on earth a man burning through $37 billion would veto a law forcing him to show the receipts. He opened his laptop back up and offered 2 chilling options. 1, the administration knows exactly where the money went and they are terrified to let the public see it. Or 2, they have no idea where it went and they don't want anyone to realize they are flying blind. He looked straight at him and admitted he genuinely didn't know which scenario was worse. Newsom reached for his water glass, a highly controlled but mistimed movement from a guy who usually micromanages his body language for the polls. He wasn't talking and he wasn't thirsty. He just needed to do something with his hands, because sitting frozen under 14 cameras screams exactly what it is, the complete absence of an answer. Vance slowed his pace down, his voice dropping into a grim, almost exhausted tone, the kind of tone you hear from someone who grew up watching public money disappear into thin air. He took everyone back to November 2020, when California was in strict lockdown. The governor shut down restaurants, businesses were bleeding out, people were losing their livelihoods and their homes. And right in the middle of it, the man who signed the lockdown order got caught eating a $350 dinner at the French Laundry in Napa Valley, wearing no mask, sitting shoulder to shoulder with lobbyists. Vance didn't yell about it. He just moved to the next data point like a surgeon making a cut, listing the governor's $3.7 million home in Fair Oaks and his massive, privately held Plump Jack winery empire. He contrasted that personal opulence against Dorothy Chen, coughing up 56% of her pension just to keep an apartment. The state had enough cash to buy every homeless person a house, but instead, the crisis spiked 44%. Dorothy is still living on a razor's edge, while the governor finishes his luxury dinner, goes back to his multi-million-dollar estate, and brazenly tells the press he is no longer interested in funding failure. Vance threw those words right back at him, pointing out that Newsom didn't just fund failure, he spent $37 billion engineering it from scratch, only to slash the budget to zero and point fingers at local mayors. That isn't leadership, Governor. That is outright abandonment. Newsom tried to fight his way out, cranking up his volume and velocity, leaning on his height and his booming voice to bulldoze the narrative. He started rapid-firing program names, touting Project Homekey, and claiming converting motels into housing was cheaper than new construction, allegedly housing 16,000 people. He rattled off the CARE Act for severe mental illness and the Encampment Resolution Fund, which supposedly cleared 11,000 sites. He caught his rhythm, speeding up, relying on the political trick where if you yell enough acronyms fast enough, it sounds like you are getting things done. He challenged Vance to name a single state building solutions at scale. The audience gave a weak, uncertain murmur, the sound of a crowd desperate to believe him, but paralyzed by 37 billion reasons to remain skeptical. Vance let him finish, just waiting him out before completely dismantling his definition of scale. He reminded everyone that Newsom promised to build 3.5 million homes by 2025, but only delivered 640,000. That is an 18% success rate, and calling 18 cents on the dollar a stretch goal is a fundamental insult to the taxpayers. Newsom bragged about leading where Washington failed, but Vance demanded a reckoning of results, not empty rhetoric. He looked at the ledger and saw $37 billion vanished, millions of unbuilt homes vanished, and accountability vanished because the governor vetoed it. He looked right at Newsom and told him everything he touches vanishes, from the money to the houses to the pledges. The only things that refuse to vanish are the 187,000 desperate souls languishing in tents beneath the highway, overpasses ignored by every commuter driving to work. Vance turned to the cameras and asked the American electorate one ultimate question, asking if this is the reality of his leadership in California. Do you really want him touching America? When the moderator gave Newsom a chance to respond, he did what he always does. He accelerated. He unleashed a louder, faster torrent of acronyms and legislative titles, spitting out HAP, Homekey, the CARE Act, the Behavioral Health Bond, and the Veterans Housing Initiative. It wasn't a coherent rebuttal. It was just a guy emptying his pockets on the table, trying to prove he had something, completely missing the point that the public wasn't questioning the existence of his programs, but their actual efficacy. He listed investments and billions allocated, but stubbornly dodged the outcomes and refused to explain where a single dollar landed. The gaping void between naming a policy and proving its success perfectly embodied the missing $37 billion, a stark reality that resonated through the quiet studio. Vance didn't say another word. He just closed his laptop, took a measured sip of water, and put the glass down. It was the exact same quiet sign-off he used at the Ocasio-Cortez town hall, the body language of a guy who finished auditing the books and definitively closed a bankrupt argument. Backstage, the political fallout was instantaneous as the campaign's 2028 finance chair texted Jake Ellison 4 ominous words indicating an urgent need to talk. In 20 years of politics, getting that text meant the major donors watched the exact same broadcast as 9 million other Americans, and they all arrived at the exact same math: $37 billion, no tracking, no results, and 0 answers. Within 72 hours, 2 specific clips from that night dominated the national discourse, amassing 38 million views. The first clip was just the basic arithmetic, asking where the $197,000 per person went. That clip hit 21 million views because it forced a public reckoning using 5th grade math, and the silence that followed from the governor was deafening. The second clip, highlighting that everything he touches vanishes, garnered 18 million views. This one didn't spread as a statistic. It circulated as a devastating final verdict on his executive competence. Republican strategists called it a kill shot, a 30-second ad that could end a presidential run before it began, while Democrats behind closed doors privately debated if their frontrunner could ever survive it. During week 1, the California Press Corps validated every single figure Vance presented. The Los Angeles Times launched a massive investigation, confirming the total absence of auditable outcome data for the majority of the expenditures. Even the Sacramento Bee, a paper that endorsed the governor twice, demanded real answers, writing that Vance just told Californians what they already knew, but attached a $37 billion price tag to it. When your hometown paper tells you to stop hiding behind acronyms, the spin is officially dead. By week 2, the internal polling math for 2028 grew increasingly grim. Newsom was still technically the frontrunner, but his crucial electability metric against a Republican challenger plummeted by 14 points in a single survey. That vanishing clip became preloaded opposition research, so factually impenetrable that opponents could air it without changing a word. Axios pointed out that his whole presidential ambition was now trapped behind a $37 billion hurdle. Major financial backers who had bundled over $4 million for his exploratory committees demanded private calls with the finance chair, making it clear that without a satisfactory answer to the spending question, their checkbooks would remain closed. Concurrently, the state auditor announced a sweeping review of $13.7 billion in spending, a seemingly nonpartisan move whose timing was undeniably tied to the televised humiliation. Facing mounting pressure in week 3, Newsom finally capitulated, hosting his first ever press conference dedicated entirely to homelessness spending. For 45 solid minutes, he abandoned the rhetoric and presented hard data, program breakdowns, and financial tracking. While substantive, the briefing served as a massive unintended confession. If this level of granular detail was always accessible, why did it require a national public flogging to produce it? And if his staff had to scramble for 3 weeks to compile what should have been routine reporting, then Vance's core accusation was entirely validated, proving the governor didn't know where the cash went because he never bothered to look. Politico captured the grim reality with a headline stating the governor finally answered the $37 billion question 3 weeks late and $37 billion short. By the second month, even his Democratic rivals started poaching the narrative, using phrases like accountability, results-based governance, and tracking taxpayer dollars in their stump speeches. It was effectively a polite way of using Vance's arguments to undermine Newsom from within his own party. Ultimately, the transparency legislation that Newsom arrogantly vetoed in 2024, Assembly Bill 2903, was quietly reintroduced and signed into law without any fanfare or photo opportunities. This silent signature was the ultimate concession, a tacit admission by pen stroke that blocking oversight on $37 billion was a monumental error in judgment. Buried on page 14 of the local paper, the stark contrast between the front page veto and the back page signature perfectly illustrated the devastating fall of a politician. The distance between the man who claimed he wouldn't fund failure and the man who spent $37 billion guaranteeing it was vast. That distance now has a name, and J.D. Vance made sure everyone knows exactly what it is.